Over the last 9 months, we've experienced isolation, loss, and uncertainty.
So, Princess Anne has just exposed the private sentence that left Catherine in tears, and the most explosive part was not simply what Camilla said, it was how long those words had been circulating behind Catherine's back, while the royal family continued smiling beside her in public. Inside a closed room at Windsor Castle, Anne repeated the remark Camilla never expected Catherine to hear. Catherine's eyes filled. Her hand rose toward her mouth. William went completely still, but Anne was not finished. She had brought more than one comment into that room, and the last one was so personal that William would demand to know how long the palace had been hiding the truth. The betrayal was not that Camilla disliked Catherine. It was that she had smiled beside her while working to weaken her future. The meeting had begun as a quiet discussion about royal duties. No cameras, no statement, no warning. Catherine arrived believing they were there to discuss appearances, responsibilities, and the image of the monarchy. Instead, Anne closed the folder in front of her, looked directly at Catherine, and said there was something she could no longer keep from her. What followed was not ordinary family tension. Anne said Camilla had been questioning Catherine's strength behind closed doors. Not her schedule, not one difficult week, her strength. Those familiar with the exchange said Camilla had described Catherine as too fragile for the weight of the role waiting beside William. Then came another phrase. Public sympathy, she said, had made Catherine bigger than the institution. Catherine did not respond at first. She had spent years standing beneath attention, carrying public expectation, raising 3 children, and preparing for a future that would place her at the center of the monarchy. Yet the words that broke through her composure did not come from a crowd or a hostile headline. They came from inside the family. William turned to Anne and asked the only question that mattered. Had Camilla said these things once, in anger, or had this been going on for months? Anne's answer was immediate. It was a pattern. That single reply changed the meaning of the meeting. Anne explained that members of staff had heard versions of the same message. Catherine was becoming too influential. Her popularity needed to be managed. Her public role could not be allowed to overshadow the authority of the current reign. One comment might have been dismissed, several could not. Then Anne placed a set of briefing papers on the table. The concern had not remained inside conversations. Language about rebalancing attention had appeared in discussions involving Catherine's public appearances. Speaking time had been reduced. Positions in photographs had been altered. Engagement details had changed without explanation. Catherine had accepted every adjustment because she believed the decisions were practical. Now each one looked like part of something larger. Camilla tried to answer. She said concern for Catherine's health and pressure had been twisted into hostility. Anne did not raise her voice. She simply reminded the room that she had warned Camilla privately to stop making personal remarks. That warning had been ignored. Charles looked stunned. He had heard concerns about workload, but not the language Anne was repeating. William's anger sharpened. If the king had received only a softened version, then someone had been shaping decisions while keeping the worst words hidden. Anne then revealed the phrase that had disturbed staff. Catherine, Camilla had said, would eventually need to be put back in her place. Catherine's eyes dropped. The insult was no longer about well-being. It was about rank, control, and the fear that the future queen was becoming more powerful than anyone had expected. Hi viewers, was Anne right to tell Catherine the truth? Comment yes or no below. And please do not watch Catherine being reduced to tears and remain silent. If you support Catherine and respect Anne for having the courage to defend her, prove it right now by liking this video, sharing it with another royal watcher, and subscribing to the channel. Camilla may have expected these words to stay hidden, but every like, share and subscription shows that the public will not ignore what was done to Catherine. But Anne had one final sentence to reveal. It involved Diana. It questioned whether Catherine's popularity truly belonged to her, or whether she was living inside the memory of a woman the public had never stopped loving. One witness had struggled to repeat it. Anne had hesitated before bringing it into the room. Now Catherine knew it was coming. William moved closer to his wife. Camilla stared at Anne. Charles said nothing. And Catherine, already fighting tears, understood that the cruelest part had not yet been spoken. Anne looked directly at her and prepared to repeat the sentence that would change every relationship around that table for good. Months before that private meeting at Windsor, tension had begun beneath royal life. Catherine had returned to duty with a tension the palace could not manufacture or control. Crowds waited to see her, families called her name, children reached toward her. Every smile and wave became the image carried across headlines by evening. She had not asked for that reaction. It came because the public had watched her endure a difficult period while protecting her children and preserving normal life. Her return felt personal, not theatrical, not staged, personal. And that difference gave her something no palace office could easily measure: trust. The attention appeared to please everyone. Charles welcomed the warmth. William remained close to Catherine. Camilla smiled beside her for cameras. Yet behind the photographs, questions moved through private rooms. Why was every Catherine appearance dominating coverage? Why were Charles and Camilla's engagements falling lower in the headlines? Why did one quiet gesture from Catherine create more emotion than a week of announcements? No one said jealousy aloud. They did not need to. The first changes were small enough to dismiss. Catherine's speaking time at one reception was shortened without explanation. At another event, a planned position beside Charles was moved down the line. A reference to her as the future queen disappeared from a briefing note and was replaced with the phrase, "senior member of the royal family." Her office was told the language had been adjusted for consistency. Catherine accepted it. That made the pattern easier to continue. She did not complain when an engagement schedule arrived late. She did not challenge a photograph arrangement that placed her away from William. She did not ask why details approved by the Wales household were being revised. She assumed the palace was dealing with pressure, public expectation, and the balance of appearing stable. But somebody was watching. Princess Anne had spent decades inside the institution. She knew the difference between disorganization and deliberate positioning. She noticed when staff became cautious around Catherine. She noticed when private secretaries stopped giving direct answers. Most of all, she noticed the same phrase appearing where it did not belong: public sympathy. The words first reached Anne through an aide near a quiet lunch. The account was careful. Camilla had expressed concern that sympathy for Catherine was beginning to distort the public balance inside the monarchy. Anne listened and asked whether the comment had been made in anger. The aide said no. It had been said calmly. That answer stayed with her. Days later, another staff member described a separate conversation. This time the wording was sharper. Catherine's popularity, the person recalled, was becoming dangerous because the public had started to see her as the emotional center of the royal family. Again, Anne asked whether the remark concerned Catherine's health or workload. Again, the answer was no. It concerned influence. Anne still refused to react quickly. She understood how words changed through palace corridors. A sentence could be softened, sharpened, or stripped of meaning before reaching the next room. So she waited. She watched. She compared what she heard with what was happening around Catherine. Then a third account arrived. A senior aide involved in planning appearances said instructions had been given to rebalance attention. Catherine should not always stand where cameras found her. Her remarks should remain brief. References to the future reign should be limited while Charles defined his own. None of those instructions carried Camilla's name, yet the language matched the private comments. That was the moment Anne stopped treating the matter as gossip. Because gossip disappears. This was leaving fingerprints. She began looking backward. The reduced speaking time, the altered photographs, the late schedule changes, the removal of language connecting Catherine to the future. Each decision could be defended alone. Together, they revealed direction. Someone was not merely reacting to Catherine's popularity, someone was trying to contain it. Catherine remained unaware. She continued arriving prepared, greeting staff warmly and standing beside Camilla with the same public respect she had always shown. That image would later become the most painful part. Catherine was offering loyalty in full view, while doubts about her strength and place were being discussed where she could not answer them. Anne faced a choice. Speak too early, and the palace would dismiss everything as misunderstanding. Wait too long, and private resentment could harden into policy. Then she saw the briefing paper. Buried beneath language about continuity and balance was a recommendation concerning Catherine's future ceremonial position. It proposed reducing her visibility at selected state occasions until the palace could reassess how much attention should gather around the Wales household. The phrase at the bottom was only 4 words. Manage the public sympathy. Anne read it twice. And suddenly, she knew exactly where the private comments had gone. Anne did not move after reading the briefing paper. She folded it, placed it inside a blue folder, and carried it away without drawing attention. The palace could survive rumour, but it struggled when someone arrived with names and dates. So she began quietly. The first person she spoke with was a senior household aide. Anne asked one question. Had the language about Catherine's popularity come from concern for her health or concern about her influence? The aide hesitated. Then came the answer. Influence. A second conversation followed with a staff member present during a private lunch. That person remembered Camilla saying Catherine was becoming too central to the monarchy's public story, not because Catherine demanded attention, but because the public gave it freely. Camilla had described that affection as difficult to control. Anne asked for the exact wording. The staff member repeated 3 phrases. Too fragile, too protected by sympathy, too visible for someone whose future role had not yet arrived. 3 phrases, 3 separate cuts. Anne wrote nothing down. Her memory was exact, and the pattern was impossible to dismiss. Catherine's health had become a shield behind which something else was being discussed. Power, position, timing. Anne wanted confirmation. The third person had helped arrange the family meeting. This account connected private remarks to practical decisions. According to that staff member, there had been pressure to limit how often Catherine appeared beside Charles. The reason given was balance. The concern beneath it was different. Whenever Catherine stood near the king, cameras moved toward her. Whenever she spoke, the headlines followed. Whenever she smiled beside William, the future seemed to arrive before the present reign was ready to release it. That was the real fear. Anne understood that the problem was not Catherine's weakness, it was Catherine's strength. She decided to confront Camilla before involving William or Catherine. She chose a private moment after a planning discussion, when the room had emptied and no staff remained close enough to hear. Anne did not accuse her of jealousy. That would have ended the conversation. Instead, she asked whether Camilla had described Catherine as too fragile for a larger role. Camilla answered that private concerns were being twisted. Anne asked again. Had she said it? Camilla replied that someone needed to think about the pressure surrounding Catherine, especially when public emotion was becoming larger than ordinary royal duty. She said protecting the monarchy sometimes required difficult language. Anne's expression did not change. Concern was one thing, she told her. Speaking about Catherine as though she were a problem to be contained was another. Camilla pushed back. She said Anne was allowing family loyalty to interfere with institutional judgment. Catherine could not be placed beyond question because the public adored her. Popularity was not authority. Sympathy was not preparation. The monarchy could not be governed by emotion. That answer told Anne everything. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a belief. Anne warned her directly. Catherine's health was not to be used as proof of weakness. Diana's memory was not to be used as a weapon. Decisions affecting the Wales household were not to be shaped through comments Catherine had no chance to answer. The room stilled. Then Camilla said Anne was overprotective. Anne left without another word. Hi viewers, should Anne have stayed silent to protect palace peace, or was she right to defend Catherine? Comment Anne was right if you believe silence would only have helped Camilla. And if watching Anne stand up for Catherine is exactly what the palace needed, like this video, share it, and subscribe now. Support should be louder than the whispers used against her. Nothing changed. Catherine's office received no apology, no briefing was corrected, no instruction was withdrawn. The palace carried on as though the warning had never been given. Then another remark reached Anne. It came from a staff member who had overheard part of a conversation after the confrontation. Camilla had apparently said Anne was becoming too involved and that Catherine's position would still need to be managed before William's responsibilities expanded. The warning had failed. Worse, one final sentence had been used. The person repeating it stopped, looked toward the door, and asked whether Anne truly wanted to hear the rest. Anne said yes. The sentence involved Diana. It suggested Catherine's public power did not fully belong to her, that she was benefiting from a memory she had not created, that the affection surrounding her was borrowed, temporary, and likely to disappear once the palace corrected the balance. Anne felt the meaning before she heard the final words. Catherine was only borrowing Diana's shadow. That was the line. Anne knew it could not remain hidden. Private intervention had failed. Silence had failed. Even a direct warning had failed. Catherine deserved the truth, however painful it might be. So Anne made one final decision. She would enter the Windsor meeting, wait until the formal business was finished, close the folder, and repeat every word to Catherine's face. Not to break her, to make sure no one could continue breaking her in secret. The meeting began with polished language and papers, upcoming engagements, public messaging, the shape of royal duty over the next several months. Every subject sounded ordinary, which made the change in tone feel severe. Catherine sat beside William at the table. Charles occupied the central chair. Camilla had a folder open in front of her. Anne said little. She watched. She listened. She waited for the secretary to finish reviewing the schedule. Then the door closed behind him. Anne placed the blue folder she carried in front of her. Charles moved to the next item, but Anne interrupted. There was something Catherine needed to hear. The sentence was calm, the effect was not. Catherine looked toward her. William leaned back at once. Camilla did not move. Anne began with the safest version. Concerns had been raised about the attention gathering around Catherine, not once, repeatedly. The concern was that Catherine's presence was beginning to dominate moments meant to reflect the current reign. Catherine answered gently. She had never asked for special attention. Anne said she knew. Then she moved deeper. The concern was not only about attention, it was about influence. People had questioned whether Catherine's growing public authority was arriving too soon. There had been suggestions that her visibility should be reduced until the palace could regain control of the narrative. William's face changed. He asked who had made those suggestions. Anne opened the folder and removed one sheet. The language was careful, but the meaning was plain. Rebalance attention, limit future positioning, review the Wales household's ceremonial prominence. Catherine read the phrases without touching the page. For months, she had assumed the late changes were logistical. A shifted seat, a shortened speech, an appearance rearranged hours before departure. Each one had seemed too small to challenge. Now those moments were sitting together in a pattern she could no longer ignore. Camilla spoke first. She said planning documents were being treated as personal attacks. Every royal household discussed visibility, timing, and public balance. The monarchy could not allow one person's popularity to overwhelm the institution around them. William asked whether Catherine's health had been discussed as part of those decisions. Camilla replied that any responsible planner would consider pressure, recovery, and public expectation. Catherine turned toward her. Was that why her role had been reduced? Camilla said no role had been reduced. Adjustments had been made to protect her. Anne closed the folder. Protection was not the word that had been used. The room tightened. Charles asked Anne to be precise. He had heard concerns about workload, but nothing suggesting hostility toward Catherine. If private language had gone further, he wanted to know how far. Anne gave him the answer. Catherine had been described as too fragile. No one spoke. The phrase landed with force, because it had been hidden beneath weeks of administrative language. Catherine's expression did not collapse, not yet, but the warmth left her face. William asked when it had been said. Anne replied that it had surfaced in more than one conversation. Camilla objected. She said the words had been removed from their proper setting. Fragility could describe a situation, not a person. Catherine had been under enormous strain, and pretending otherwise would have been irresponsible. Anne did not argue over definitions. She delivered the next line. Public sympathy, Camilla had said, was making Catherine bigger than the institution. Charles looked toward Camilla. That was not language about schedules. It was language about rivalry. Catherine remained still, but her fingers tightened beneath the table. William's voice lowered. Had those remarks shaped official decisions? Charles said he had approved adjustments based on workload and balance. He had not been told that anyone was questioning Catherine's worth or using her health as an argument against her future. That distinction did not calm William. It made the situation worse. Someone had filtered the information before it reached the king. Someone had taken personal resentment and dressed it as administration. Camilla insisted there had been no campaign. Only difficult conversations about a monarchy under pressure. She said Catherine's popularity brought responsibility, and responsibility required limits. Anne asked one question. Who decided those limits? Camilla did not answer. The silence answered for her. Catherine finally looked down. One tear gathered, then another. The pain was no longer coming from a single insult. It came from realizing that ordinary moments had carried another meaning. Every unexplained change, every careful smile. Every time she had wondered whether she had made a mistake. William pushed his chair back slightly. Anne raised one hand. There was more. She revealed that Camilla had spoken about the future, not only the present. Once the monarchy changed direction, Catherine would need to be put back in her place. The sentence broke through the room. Catherine's eyes filled completely. Charles told Camilla to explain. Camilla said the words referred to constitutional order, not humiliation. Anne answered that no constitutional discussion required that phrase. Then Anne turned toward Catherine. The worst sentence had not yet been spoken. It involved Diana, and this time, no one tried to stop her. Anne did not rush the final sentence. She let the silence stretch until every person at the table understood that what came next would not be another complaint about schedules, rank, or public attention. This was personal, older, deeper. It reached into a part of Catherine's life that had followed her from the moment she stepped beside William. Diana. Catherine lifted her eyes slowly. William moved closer, not enough to interrupt, but enough to make one thing clear. She would not face the next words alone. Anne spoke exactly as she had heard them. Camilla had said Catherine was only borrowing Diana's shadow. For 1 second, no one reacted. Then Catherine's face changed. The tears came before she could stop them. Her hand rose toward her mouth, and the strength she had held through every earlier revelation finally gave way. It was not because Diana's name had been mentioned. Catherine had lived with that comparison for years. It was because the sentence turned every act of public warmth into something false. Every cheer, every headline, every person who saw hope in her. According to Camilla's remark, none of it truly belonged to Catherine. It had been borrowed, temporary, unearned. William stared across the table. His anger no longer looked sudden. It looked settled, controlled, dangerous in its calm. He asked when the words had been spoken. Anne answered without looking away from Catherine. After the warning. That was the part no one expected. Camilla had not made the remark before Anne confronted her privately. She had made it afterward, after being told clearly that Catherine's health, her future, and Diana's memory were not to be used against her. The line had been crossed, knowingly. Charles turned to Camilla and asked whether she denied it. Camilla did not give a direct answer. She said private conversations were being repeated without context. The phrase, she argued, had referred to public perception. Catherine was constantly compared with Diana, and the palace could not pretend that comparison had no effect on her popularity. Anne's reply came fast. Public perception did not include the words, "Put her back in her place." The room went still again. Camilla said the monarchy could not be guided by emotion. Catherine's popularity, however genuine, had created expectations that no one could safely ignore. If the public began treating her as the centre of the institution before William became king, the present reign would be weakened. There it was. Not concern. Fear. Catherine lowered her hand. Tears remained on her face, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. She asked how many people had heard the remarks. Anne told her enough people had heard separate versions for the pattern to be clear. Catherine asked the harder question. How long had everyone known? William turned toward her. That question carried more pain than anger. Catherine was no longer asking what Camilla thought. She was asking how many people had stood beside her, smiled at her, accepted her kindness, and said nothing while the whispers continued. Charles tried to answer. He said he had not known the full language. He had been told there were concerns about pressure, timing, and the balance between households. Nothing more. Catherine looked toward Anne. Anne did not protect anyone. She said some staff had been afraid to speak. Others believed the matter would pass. A few thought silence was safer than becoming involved in a conflict between two royal households. Safer for whom? The question hung in the room. William pushed his chair back. He wanted Catherine out of there, away from the table, away from the explanations, away from Camilla. But Catherine stopped him. Not with a raised voice, with one hand. She wiped her face, drew a slow breath, and looked across at Camilla. For the first time that afternoon, the room was no longer watching Catherine as the injured person. It was watching her as the woman who would one day stand beside the king. She said concerns about her health could have been brought to her directly. Questions about workload could have been discussed with William. Decisions involving her duties could have gone through the Wales household. What could not continue was this. Private judgment disguised as protection. Personal resentment hidden inside official language. Diana's memory used to erase Catherine's own work. Camilla replied that no one was trying to erase her. Catherine answered with one quiet sentence. Then why had every change made her smaller? No one had an answer. Charles called for the meeting to end, but Anne remained seated. She had one final piece of information to place on the table. The briefing note about Catherine's ceremonial position had not been withdrawn. It still existed inside the planning system, waiting for approval. William looked at Charles. Catherine looked at Camilla, and Anne opened the blue folder once more. The confrontation was over, but the decision was not. Anne removed the document from the blue folder and placed it in front of Charles. It was not a speech draft or another vague note about balance. It was a proposed ceremonial order for an upcoming state occasion, and Catherine's name had been moved away from the position traditionally reserved for the woman expected to stand beside the future king. Charles read the page once, then again. The change was small enough to hide inside protocol, but large enough to send a message. Catherine would still attend. She would still smile. She would still appear in photographs. Yet the placement would quietly tell everyone inside the palace that her future position could be adjusted whenever another office felt threatened by it. William asked who had approved the change. No one answered. Camilla said planning documents passed through several hands and should not be treated as proof of personal intent. Anne replied that the document contained language already used in private conversations. The same language, the same concern, the same effort to reduce Catherine without ever confronting her directly. Charles quietly closed the folder. The plan would not proceed. He ordered that all future decisions involving Catherine's duties, ceremonial position, public appearances, and speaking role be sent to the Wales household. No private revision. No quiet instruction. No last-minute alteration without William and Catherine being informed. It was not an apology, but it was a boundary. Catherine remained seated, collecting herself. The tears had not vanished, but neither had her composure. She looked at Charles and said that concern could only be called concern when the person affected was allowed into the conversation. Anything else became control. Camilla tried once more to explain that the monarchy required discipline. Catherine did not argue. She simply said discipline should begin with honesty. That sentence ended the defense. William stood beside her. This time, Catherine rose with him. Anne watched them move toward the door, and Catherine turned back. She did not look at Camilla. She looked at Anne. There was no dramatic embrace. Only a small nod. Gratitude. Pain. Understanding. Then Catherine and William left the room together. The meeting should have ended there, but Anne remained behind. Charles asked whether exposing every remark had truly been necessary. Anne answered that private warnings had already been given and ignored. Silence had protected appearances, but it had not protected Catherine. She then said the sentence Charles could not dismiss. If the palace demanded loyalty from Catherine in public, it owed her honesty in private. Charles looked toward the closed door. Whatever he believed before the meeting, he could no longer pretend this was a disagreement over scheduling. A line had been crossed, and the person expected to preserve unity had been forced to discover how little unity existed behind the photographs. From that day forward, the atmosphere changed. Publicly, nothing appeared broken. Catherine and Camilla could still stand at the same event. William could still walk beside Charles. Anne could still enter a room without showing what had happened. The monarchy would continue doing what it had always done best. It would perform stability. But behind the performance, trust had shifted. William no longer accepted unexplained changes from Camilla's office. Catherine no longer assumed every adjustment was harmless. Charles now knew that softened briefings could hide personal agendas, and Camilla knew something she had not understood before. Anne was willing to speak. That knowledge mattered more than any argument in the room. Anne had not raised her voice. She had not threatened a public scene. She had gathered the words, followed where they led, and placed them before the people they affected. The silence was over. For Catherine, the deepest wound was not that Camilla questioned her popularity. It was that private resentment had traveled through official channels while she continued offering respect. Yet the same meeting that reduced her to tears also gave her something she had not possessed before: clarity. She now knew where the resistance came from. She knew which decisions required questions. She knew Anne would not allow whispers to become policy without challenge. And she knew William had heard everything. Hi viewers, if Princess Anne earned your respect for standing beside Catherine when others stayed quiet, do not leave without showing it. Like this video, share it with another royal watcher, and subscribe now. Catherine was expected to smile while being pushed aside, but every person who supports her can make it clear that such treatment will not be ignored. Because this story is not finished. The next video will reveal the state banquet seating plan that placed Catherine 3 positions away from William, the handwritten note beside her name, and the royal figure who ordered the arrangement changed before guests entered the room. That detail changes everything.